can still feel the warmth of the kitchen lights against my skin and the cold shock settling into my chest as the room fell silent. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, and for a split second, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause, almost as if the whole house was holding its breath along with me. If you've ever reached that point where your world tilts in an instant, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because moments like this leave marks you don't forget. I remember touching my cheek, stunned by how something so small could carry the weight of every unspoken hurt I'd ignored for years. That was the morning I realized nothing in my life was what I thought it was. Let me show you how it all began. I still remember the sting of that moment, standing in my own kitchen in Boulder, Colorado, when my daughter-in-law spit in my face. I'm 64 years old, and nothing in my life had ever prepared me for that kind of humiliation. What cut even deeper was watching my son stand there, silent, shrinking into himself as if defending me would cost him something he couldn't spare. The shock hit first, sharp and disorienting, like my mind couldn't keep up with what my body already knew had happened. I could feel the warmth of it on my cheek, and for a second, the whole world went strangely quiet. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt. I was just numb. It's strange how betrayal does that. It freezes you before it burns you. I didn't say a word. I didn't trust myself to. Instead, I walked past both of them, steady on the outside, even though something inside me was collapsing in slow motion. I went upstairs to my bedroom, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed, the way you do when you're trying not to fall apart. That was when something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a cold, steady realization settling into my bones, a quiet understanding that the life I thought I was living had already changed long before that moment. I had just finally caught up to it, and as I sat there in that heavy silence, I knew I needed to go back to where all this really began. I sat in my room that night, the silence pressing in around me, and all I could think about was how far things had drifted from what I once imagined. After my husband passed, this house in Boulder felt too big and too quiet. I told myself I was strong enough to live with the loneliness, but deep down, I missed the simple warmth of someone moving through the same space with me. So when Lucas and Brianna said they needed a place to stay just for a little while, I opened the door without hesitation. I thought having family close would soften the ache I carried. I thought it would help all of us. In the beginning, it felt good. They were grateful, at least on the surface. They talked about getting back on their feet, saving for a place of their own, building something stable. But even then, I sensed little cracks forming, small things brushed off as stress or tiredness, a forgotten dish, a dismissive tone, a door closed a little too hard. I kept telling myself not to read too much into it. I wanted so badly for us to feel like a family again. But over time, those cracks widened. Their temporary stay stretched longer and longer. Responsibilities shifted quietly onto my shoulders. Bills they said they'd cover, but didn't. Groceries that disappeared faster than I could restock them. An air of entitlement slowly replacing appreciation. I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach, convincing myself I just needed to be patient. After all, what kind of mother turns her child away when he's struggling? Still, There were moments when I'd catch myself standing in my own kitchen or hallway, feeling like a guest in the home I had built. Looking back now, I realized the breaking point didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for a long time, simmering quietly, and that simmer was about to turn into something I could no longer ignore. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after it happened, trying to make sense of the argument that had spun so far out of control. The house felt too still, almost hollow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I kept feeling that spot on my cheek, the place where Brianna's anger had landed. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the meaning behind it, the final confirmation that whatever respect once lived in this home had withered away. What lingered even more was Lucas's silence. My own son, standing feet away, acting as if defending me would pull him into some storm he didn't want to face. That silence cut sharper than anything else. I had raised him to be better than that, or at least I thought I had. For a while, the hurt swallowed everything. I let myself sit in that collapse, the kind where your body stays upright only because you don't have the strength to fall apart. As night settled in, I didn't turn on a single light. I just sat there, letting the quiet stretch until it felt like it was holding me together. Somewhere in those hours, the numbness softened, and in its place came clarity. This wasn't a single moment. This was the sum of years, small slights, ignored boundaries, shifting expectations, little pieces of myself I had handed over until I barely recognized my own life. By the time the first light touched my window, something in me had settled. Not anger, not vengeance, just resolve. I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I needed to reclaim what I had allowed to slip. I needed to protect what was left of my peace. And with that first quiet breath of morning, I decided it was time to take real action, starting with a phone call that would change everything. The morning after that long, sleepless night felt strangely peaceful. I woke before the sun had fully settled over the foothills and moved through the kitchen with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I cracked eggs, sliced fruit, put on coffee, and let the familiar motions steady my breathing. Cooking had always been my way of finding myself again, and that morning, every small movement felt intentional. I wanted the house to feel serene. I wanted them to walk into a scene they wouldn't know how to read. By 7:15 a.m., the table was set, and sitting at the end of it, perfectly composed in a navy suit, was Martin Hale, my attorney. I had called him at 2:30 p.m. the day before, right after that moment upstairs when resolve finally took root. He didn't hesitate. He told me to sit tight and that he'd come by first thing in the morning. When Lucas and Brianna wandered into the kitchen, still groggy, they froze the moment they saw him. Their eyes darted from the food to Martin, then finally to me. I could almost feel the shift in the room, like gravity rewriting itself. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one shrinking. Martin had already walked me through everything: my rights as the homeowner, the legal protections in place, the obligations I had never enforced, and the consequences they could face if things escalated. Hearing all of that out loud had steadied something inside me. I wasn't powerless. I had simply forgotten how much of this life was still mine. Sitting at that table, watching their confusion settle into unease, I felt an unmistakable sense of balance returning. Not revenge, just clarity. They had treated my home like a safety net they never had to respect. But Martin reminded me that this house, every inch of it, belonged to me outright. And with that came authority I had never once used. I could see it in their faces. They realized the ground beneath them had shifted. And what they didn't know yet was that this wasn't even the full extent of what I had to reveal. I had almost forgotten about those old boxes in the storage room. The ones Lucas insisted were nothing but scraps from his childhood. He used to brush them off with a shrug, calling them junk he would deal with someday. But the morning after Martin's visit, when the house was finally quiet, something nudged me to look. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the way everything else in my life had started demanding clarity. When I opened those boxes and saw the comic book covers, something in me paused. I wasn't a collector, but I knew enough to recognize age and rarity. Curiosity took over, and I spent the next few hours researching every title, every issue, every tiny detail. By 7:15 a.m., I had confirmed what Lucas never bothered to check: those worthless comics were worth thousands. Some even more. Later, when I mentioned what I had found, I watched their faces shift. Panic first, then disbelief, then anger swallowed down because they knew they no longer had the upper hand. They realized, maybe for the first time, that their carelessness had consequences, not just emotionally, but financially. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply laid out the truth. For years, they had lived under my roof, paying nothing, contributing nothing, taking my patience and my kindness as if they were guaranteed. I had carried the weight of their choices while they acted as if I owed them comfort. So I told them they had 1 week to move out, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed my home back. I needed my peace back. And I needed them to understand that adulthood meant responsibility, not entitlement. They stood there, stunned, and I could feel the shift settling even deeper. They thought the comics were the only surprise in store. But I knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger unraveling, one they never saw coming. When I handed Lucas and Brianna the written agreement, I could see the desperation in their eyes. 90 days, clear expectations, contributions to the household, respect for shared spaces, no access to my office or personal documents. It was all laid out plainly, and for a moment, they tried to mask their resentment behind forced politeness. I think they believed I wouldn't follow through, that this was just another one of my soft boundaries they could nudge aside. But I felt strangely calm as I explained each condition. Structure, I thought, might give us all a fighting chance. The first week went surprisingly smoothly. They woke up earlier than usual, cleaned up after themselves, even asked if I needed anything from the store. I'll admit, I let myself hope. I wanted to believe the agreement could help us rebuild something, or at least coexist without tension. But slowly, the old patterns returned. A sink full of dishes left for me to find, laundry abandoned in the machine, doors closed with that familiar edge of irritation, little comments floating through the hallway, just loud enough to remind me they still resented the boundaries I had drawn. Every day, something new chipped away at the fragile peace. Then came the moment that ended any lingering wishful thinking. I walked into my office one afternoon and noticed my file drawer wasn't fully closed. At first, I thought maybe I had left it that way, but the papers weren't how I'd placed them. My financial documents, retirement accounts, insurance policies, the will, had clearly been handled. There was no mistaking it. A cold, steady disappointment settled inside me. Not anger, not shock, just a hard, quiet understanding. They weren't trying to change. They were trying to see what they could take. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I simply documented everything. Every missed chore, every late contribution, every boundary crossed. For the first time, I saw the situation without excuses, without hope clouding the truth. And as that clarity settled in, I knew the 90-day trial wasn't leading to transformation. It was leading to consequences, real ones. The unraveling had begun, and the next step would make everything unmistakably clear. When Martin sat across from me later that week, his voice was steady, but the weight of what he shared settled deep in my chest. I had asked him to help me navigate the breaches of our agreement, but I wasn't prepared for the layers he uncovered. He told me Brianna had a history of embezzlement tied to a job she left years ago, debts she had never resolved, and an active inquiry she had managed to outrun by moving states. Hearing that, I felt a heaviness sink in. Not anger, but a quiet sorrow for how long she'd been running from her own choices. Then came the part about Lucas, my son, my boy I had held through every scraped knee and heartbreak. Martin explained there was a pending investigation into unemployment fraud. Claims he had continued to collect long after he started doing informal contract work for cash. I felt the air leave my lungs, not because I couldn't believe it, but because part of me suddenly understood the fear behind his silence, the defensiveness I had mistaken for arrogance. That evening, when I sat them down, I didn't need to repeat everything Martin had told me. They could see it in my eyes, and for the first time, their bravado simply broke. Brianna's shoulders slumped, and Lucas couldn't lift his gaze from the floor. The house felt unbearably still. I didn't hear words, but I felt their plea as clearly as if they had spoken it aloud. One more chance, one moment of mercy, one last hope that they hadn't pushed me past the point of caring. I surprised myself with how conflicted I felt. A part of me wanted distance, protection, boundaries they could never cross again. But another part, the part that still remembered them before all this, felt compassion push through the hurt. I didn't want to punish them. I wanted them to finally face their lives honestly. This moment, painful as it was, stripped away every illusion. And as I looked at them, truly looked at them, I realized this was the first time they were standing without excuses. The reckoning had arrived, but so had an opportunity for something else, something harder, slower, and far more meaningful. It was time to shift from confrontation to responsibility, and I knew the next steps would define everything that came after. In the days that followed that heavy reckoning, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but quieter in a way that hinted at something shifting beneath the surface. I started noticing small changes before I ever heard a word about them. Lucas was up earlier than I'd seen him in years, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, filling out job applications with a kind of tired determination. Brianna spent long stretches on the phone with community programs, asking about repayment plans and counseling classes. None of it was dramatic. It was slow, steady, almost fragile, like watching two people learn how to stand again. I made a conscious choice to step back. I didn't comment, didn't coach, didn't guide unless they asked. I wanted whatever they were doing to be theirs, not a performance for my approval. Some mornings, I'd see them struggling, Brianna fighting frustration over online coursework, Lucas pacing the living room after another rejection email. But there was a new kind of effort in the air. Not the brittle, defensive kind I had grown used to. Something quieter, something real. I'd be lying if I said it healed everything inside me. There were moments when I felt a pull of old hurt. Moments when fear whispered that they'd slip right back into the habits that had worn me down for years. But then, I'd walk past the laundry room and see their clothes washed and folded, or I'd find a handwritten list of their shared expenses taped neatly inside the pantry door, and a soft warmth would spread through me. Hope, cautious but present. The turning point came one afternoon when I found Lucas repairing the broken fence panel in the yard, the one he'd ignored for months. He didn't see me watching from the window. He wasn't doing it for praise. He was doing it because it needed to be done. And something in me eased for the first time. Day by day, they kept showing up, imperfect, inconsistent, but trying. And as I stood in the doorway one evening, watching them quietly plan out their next week of responsibilities, I realized we had reached the edge of something new, something that might finally grow into the life they were meant to build. 3 years have passed now, and sometimes I catch myself standing in the doorway of my own life, quietly amazed at how much has changed. Lucas has a steady job with a local HVAC company here in Boulder, and every morning he's out the door before 7:15 a.m. with a sense of purpose I once feared he'd never find again. Brianna completed her classes, paid off the first portion of her restitution, and now works full-time at a nonprofit that helps people rebuild their credit. Watching her grow into someone accountable, someone grounded, has been its own unexpected blessing. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It came in slow, honest steps, missed ones, learned ones, repeated ones. But somewhere along the way, resentment softened into humility, and fear turned into determination. Their home now, just a few blocks from mine, carries that same quiet effort. I see it in their routines, the way they treat each other, the way they show up without being asked. And when they talk to me now, there's no defensiveness in their eyes, just gratitude, real gratitude. One moment stays with me more than anything. Last spring, after Lucas received a small promotion, he stopped by my house with a simple bouquet of sunflowers. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. I could feel the meaning in the way he placed them gently on my table. It was an acknowledgement of the past, of the hard parts, and of the grace that helped carry us through. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about discipline or consequences. It was about boundaries, how they protect love, not replace it, how compassion needs structure, and structure needs heart. I learned that I can care deeply without losing myself, and they learned that responsibility can be a doorway instead of a punishment. And now, with peace restored in my home and in my heart, I find myself grateful for the journey, even the painful parts, because they shaped us into who we are today. If you've ever lived through something like this, or had to find your strength the hard way, I'd truly love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. When I look back on everything we walked through together, it almost feels like watching another lifetime unfold. What began in pain and confusion slowly reshaped itself into something steadier, something honest, something I never expected to find on the other side of all that heartbreak. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're anchors that help keep relationships grounded. And love, real love, doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It grows stronger when it's paired with truth, accountability, and the willingness to begin again. I won't pretend the journey was easy. There were moments when I questioned myself, moments when forgiveness felt too heavy, moments when the past tried to pull us backward. But what I discovered is that healing doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for effort, consistency, and courage from everyone involved. And when those things finally came together, they created a peace I had almost forgotten was possible. If there's one lesson I carry with me now, it's that we're all capable of growing beyond our worst moments. Sometimes we just need someone to hold a mirror steady enough for us to see who we've become and who we still have the chance to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it resonated with you or reminded you of something you've lived through, I would be grateful to hear your experience. Share it in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.